Hello and welcome, this is AgentXP, and welcome back to another TRLE tutorial. In this episode, we're going to look at some techniques for creating interesting room geometry, as well as some methods for more advanced texturing. We're going to look at some room geometry techniques. Now, we won't actually be building a finished room in this episode, but what I'm going to do is show you some of the ways in which you can create more interesting shapes within your room. Let's get started here. We have a simple square room as before, and we've already covered how you can make wall grids. Just to refresh your memory, if you want to create a nice wall grid in the entire room, you can press F12. That's a key shortcut. Or if you want to do one wall at a time, you can select the wall and press F11, and that's a handy shortcut that you can use. This means the walls are all pre-divided, so if we want to texture them, then the textures will be the right scale. So what I normally do is select the entire floor and raise the floor, lower the ceiling until you have a 12-click high room. I find this is a nice size to work with. It's not too high and it's not too low, and you have an additional texture border at your disposal. So if, for example, you want to create a step in the geometry of the room, you then have the leeway to raise up a tiny texture bar like so, and you can then do a slope down so that you do not get any cracks. Now, what I mean by cracks, I will show you here, is if we make this step, we have an area where this texture here is lower than this texture. The two bottom bits do not match up, the lines do not match. This is particularly noticeable in a water room. So if I was to leave that in a water room, I texture it, etc., and make this a water room, you would get ugly cracks appearing, especially when you're viewing it underwater. And it's ideal to avoid these. I mean, even Core Design left a few of them in, but you can kind of see when you're rotating the editor that it's just looking a little bit awkward. That line, when you're moving around, just doesn't look quite right. And when you're in game, it will be more noticeable. So it's ideal to try and avoid those. So this is why grids are so important, and this is why I like to leave a spare one at the top and the bottom of the room so that you can match up the lines. And this way, the bottom of that line is going to the bottom of that line. So that is why having these grids is very important. If you don't like that little seam that we've added, you can raise the corner of the floor by 1. And assuming you're going for a natural sort of environment, that can look like a bit of sand or something. The next thing we're going to look at is how to create sloped floors and ceilings. Now, if you want to make a boulder ramp, for example, we're going to assume this side of the room is going to be a boulder ramp. So what we're going to do is we're going to select maybe part of the floor. I'm going to click on it, and we get these arrows appearing. And you keep clicking and the arrows move around, and then they disappear and then they reappear again. So this is how you create sloped floors. And what we can do is if we click on the Floor Plus button, it will raise by 1. Click it back down, it will go back down. If you right click the floor button, it will go up by 4. And like so. And you can do the same with the ceiling as well to create a nice slope. So what we're going to do is we're going to go down by 2, and we're going to go up by 2. Now 2 is the maximum slope that Lara can stand on without sliding, and it's worth knowing this measurement. And what we're going to do is we're going to select each part of the slope, and we are going to raise it so that it matches up. It might be a bit difficult to see this side, but this is what we're doing. We're getting the slope to match. So it's kind of like steps. It makes it into steps, and you have to even them out so that they all create a seamless slope, like so. And that is how you make a slope. Equally, you can leave it as stairs if you want to. So if I do this, do that, and it becomes steps, sloped steps. So there we have a slope, and Lara can run up this slope, and you can ideally put a boulder trap at the top, and that would create a nice little trap room for Lara to run around in or get squished in, as is usually the case. So that is how you make a slope, and you can make a 1-click or a 2-click slope. And if you make any higher than 2 clicks, Lara cannot stand on it, she will slide. But you can incorporate a single 3-click slope, and Lara can jump up 1 square. It's worth bearing that in mind. So if you have a single sloped tile, Lara will be able to jump up it in-game. It's worth knowing what Lara can and can't do on different surfaces and the height at which she can jump. And a reminder, Lara can jump a total of 7 clicks high, and by this we mean a single click in the editor. So if I click once, that's 1 click, 1, 2, 3, that's 4 clicks high, 1, 2, 3, that's 7. And that is the highest block that Lara can jump on. Right, so next we're going to create a slightly different slope. So this is a slightly more advanced slope again. But what we're going to do is I'm going to create 1-click high slope, move the floor up like so, and we're going to create a slope at an angle. So the way you do this is hold down the control key, and you now get a diagonal pointing arrow. And if we click once like so, that will turn up the corners. And this creates a rather nice diagonal slope. But so far we've only lifted the tiles in one direction. So next we're going to take our arrows, rotate them to the opposite direction and go down 1. And this makes a flat tile. And lower that one. And you will see there that all the corners match up. Although be careful, because we now have a white bit there, and that means there's no texture on it, so that will look glitchy in game. So what we need to do is raise that shape up, and we now have a sloped corner shape. Lara will be able to run on that. It looks quite steep, but it's actually not, so you can create some quite clever slopes with that. That looks like a very steep slope, and yet Lara can run on it. Next, we're going to look at methods for making our room geometry look a little more natural. I'm also going to show you how to make a simple domed ceiling. So I'm going to select another room. I'm going to make it fairly small. And we have a simple 3x3 room here. And if we want to make it less of a box, one thing we can do is to give it a domed ceiling. So if we click in the centre, and we hold down control and we right click once, you can see that instantly that creates a dome in the ceiling. And if we want to add a little more detail, we can click on the corners, use the direction arrows and right click them to point the corners down. And if we go around the room like so, we have now created a very nice domed area, and this has instantly made a very small, uninteresting square room a lot more interesting. Now I'm going to show you how you do this in a bigger room. So do our key shortcut again and make the room a normal height. I'm actually going to make it 8 clicks high this time so we can see the dome more clearly, because the dome is going to give the room a lot of height. So what I'm going to do here is select the inner square, leave a border around the edge, and I am going to hold down control and I'm going to right click ceiling plus once. Whoops, that was twice. And we can see that has raised up the centre. Now if we select the inner square again, leave another flat border, we can hold down control and left click 3 times. 1, 2, 3. And then we go to the inner square again and we click twice. And you can kind of see what that's done. That has created a nice gently sloped dome. Now you can make it as gentle or as steeply sloped as you like. It's worth having a play around with this. And we can do once more in the centre if we want to. And that's a nice gently sloped dome. And like we did in the other room, we can also flatten off the corners if we want to. So now we have a domed room, and you can see that there are so many different things you can do with this. And if you want to make it look a bit more natural, you could hold down the control key and lower a bit of the ceiling so it looks like it's sort of destroyed, and you could texture that section as a rock fall or something. Whoops, make sure you don't get any of those white bits, because that means it's not textured. That's not going to look good in game. Match up your seams wherever possible. And we're just doing this very quickly, but it just shows you how holding down the control button and doing this can very, very quickly give you some nice natural looking geometry. So most of this dome could be textured in a sort of domey texture, if that's a thing, a sort of brick, and then you can texture this section as rock, and it instantly adds interest to your room. Because Lara's meant to be exploring tombs, I feel it's always nice to have a bit of a destroyed look about the place, and it's really easy to do it this way. And if you have a flat floor, it's a really cool idea to use the diagonal arrows, and every so often you can do a destroyed floor tile. And maybe we want the centre of the room to have a lower section. In fact, we're going to make some steps here, like so. And what I often like to do is take the edge of a step and right click to create a destroyed section. And you can also do it with a single step as well. Take out a section like so. And we also can create a raised bit and texture the raised section as sand, for example, so that it looks like there's a bit of sand gathered, which is making the slope. So cool. Those are some techniques that I use for creating a more natural looking environment. When it comes to texturing environments like this, it can be a little tricky. One of the things we want to pay particular attention to is the rotation of the textures. Now, if I was to just take a brick texture, for example, and just stick this along the wall like so, you can see here that there are some very squished, horrible looking tiles, and we don't want this in game. That's going to look horrible, and it's very amateurish. So what we need to do to fix this is to pay particular attention to the green triangle that's around the corner of the texture, like so. And if you keep clicking on the texture in different places, you can make the triangle move around. So what we want to do is select the corresponding triangle to the texture that we want on the map. If we look at the map here and we select the corresponding green triangle on the texture, click on the wall, and then we can right click to rotate it, and we will now get a nicely matched up texture with no seams and no squished effect on it. So we also want to do the same for the next texture, and as you see, while that looks better, that still doesn't look right. It's still squished, so we need to rotate it twice like so, and that will now appear straight. And do the same for this texture, rotate, and cool. We now have a wall with no horrible squished triangles. Now if we look at this wall, we will notice that the tile is not the full 4-click height. So what we need to do here, if we want the texture to look the same scale as the textures on the other wall, is to only select part of the texture. So what we want to do is right click and click and drag on the texture from halfway up the texture, so only select half of it, and that will draw a box. So we can then click on the wall like so, rotate as we did before, and that texture will now be the same scale as the texture on the other wall because we've only selected half of it. Now this presents us with a slight problem though, because we need to select the green triangle that corresponds with this tile. And how do we do that? There is a handy button on the keyboard which will appear on screen right now. You want to select this key on the keyboard, and if you press this key, you can rotate the green triangle on the texture, and you can now click on the tile on the wall like so, rotate, and there you have your correctly scaled texture. So that is how you texture partial tiles to avoid getting squished textures, and the same can be true of these steps. The sides of these steps are only 1 click high, so we don't want a full-size texture. As you can see, if we apply a full-size texture to that step, then it's going to look a bit horrible. We don't really want that. Some textures you can get away with, like this one for example, but if you don't want any of those textures, say for example you wanted the edge of one of these tiles, so maybe this one, and we just wanted a brick edge. Actually, perhaps that's not such a good one. Try this one. Like so. We're going to use the key I showed you to rotate the triangle, like so. And you have a nicely placed texture. Now we're going to look at how you texture these diagonal triangles. So if we take a sand texture and we just click and drag on the map, like so, normally this works on flat surfaces, but if we do this on diagonal textures, you will get some horribly rotated tiles that don't look very good. What you want to do when texturing diagonal tiles like these is hold down the Alt key, click, and you will get a correctly rotated texture. But maybe assume for a moment that for texturing purposes you want to have half the tile one texture and half the tile the other. For example, let's show you what I mean here. If we're going to make this stone, but we want this half of the texture to be sand. Let's do a bit more step, there we go. We want the sloped bit to be sand. What we're going to do is, similar to what we did on the wall, click on the portion of the texture which corresponds to the triangle that you have on the map, and apply the texture. We now have a correctly textured half triangle. Next, I'm going to show you some tips and tricks for using the wall divisions to your advantage when texturing. The first thing I'm going to do is to create a nice archway around a door using the wall divisions. Now, sometimes in your texture pack you will have these nice corner textures like so, and if you mirror the texture and rotate again, you can create a nice door surround. But we don't always have that luxury in our TGAs. Sometimes you might have a single texture and think, I want to have a door surround made out of that texture. Now, while that looks kind of okay, wouldn't it be cool if we could round off the corners? Well, there is a way of doing this using the wall divisions, and it's a cool trick that I'm going to show you. So assuming we have a 12 click high room with 3 wall grids like so, and we have 2 spare wall divisions that we can raise and lower, this is quite easy. This is yet another reason why I like to work with 12 click high rooms and leave a spare grid at the top and the bottom of the room. If you click on a wall, you will get white arrows appearing, and we can use these to tilt the wall divisions. I'm now going to show you how you make an archway. So what we do is bring down the ceiling grid, and we're going to tilt it upwards. You want to click until the white arrows are pointing at the section of wall that you want to move. Then use the key shortcuts to raise and lower the grid. Get all the corners matched up. Now this is kind of counterintuitive. You think, what's going on here? You have the wall grids slanting towards the centre. So now if we turn on texturing, you can see it's kind of screwed things up a little. But if we play around with the textures, and it always takes me a little bit of trial and error to get this right, you need to select the correct corners of the texture. Once again, you need to use the texture triangle. Select the opposite corner, like so. You can now see what I have achieved here. What I have done is split the tile into 2 halves, which means I can now create a corner out of a single texture. And this is a really nifty little trick that you can use. I'm going to do the same with the other corner. It always takes me a bit of trial and error to get the right segment of the texture. And there we have it. That is our door arch. And we can just pretend that there's a doorway in the middle, and that looks great. So what we have done is create a doorway out of a single texture. And you can create other cool effects with this as well as just a doorway. I'm going to do something else over here. I'm going to show you how you can make a sort of diamond centerpiece texture in the middle of your wall. So I'm going to use Ceiling Plus. I'm going to slant up the ceiling like so. I'm going to bring down the top layer just to create a diamond shape in the wall. Lower it. So this time I'm raising up the floor. And you have to do a bit of trial and error with the arrows. They're not very intuitive. Sometimes it doesn't look as if they're pointing at the edge of the tile when they actually are. So play around with it a bit and you can eventually get it to work. And you can kind of see what I've done there. I've made a diamond shape in the wall. So if we now apply textures to this, I'm just going to do a wall generic texture. And make sure you select the right segment of the triangle so that you can get no distorted textures. And now we have a diamond shape in the middle that we can get some quite cool effects with. So just play around with this and have a bit of fun. So even when you don't have a diamond shaped texture, you can get some quite cool effects with this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to colour coordinate this a little more and see how we can get some different looks going on. Whoops, I just broke that one. There we go. And we can do all kinds of things with this. Mirror. I'm just showing you some of the effects that you can get by having this diamond shape in the middle here. In fact, that would look quite nice, I think. And if we use the mirroring option, if we just want the middle section of that square, you can use the control button to mirror the texture, and that looks quite cool. We have a nice diamond. I mean, you can, if you want to, get the lines around the edges, like that, but the textures around the edge are distorted, and you have varying degrees of success with that. It doesn't look that great, if I'm honest, so it's better to try and keep textures undistorted. And as you can see, using that diamond wall effect, you can get some quite cool looking patterns. So it's always worth just having a play with it and seeing what you can come up with. So those are two different ways you can use the wall divisions as aids when texturing. In this episode, we've looked at utilising the floor and ceiling controls for creating slopes and more natural geometry, as well as domed ceilings. And we have also looked at how you texture without distortions, and also some tricks for utilising the wall grids in order to texture in a slightly more exciting way. So, if you found this video useful, please consider liking and subscribing, and if you do subscribe, please do be sure to hit the little notification bell so that you're notified if I upload a future video. If you have any suggestions, please do comment below, and I will see you in the next video. This is AgentXP. Thank you for watching. TTFN.